Thanks to our partners at Second Swing Golf, Scony, Pins and Aces, Fireaway Tees, Steadfast Golf, and Turtlebacks. Please be sure to check out our show notes with exclusive discounts to these amazing products. Some links may contain affiliate links, which we may earn a small commission at no additional cost to you. Welcome back to the Golf Mom Mindset Podcast, where we talk about all things junior golf, mindset, and the journey of raising confident, resilient young athletes, both on and off the course. Today, I'm so excited to announce my special guest, Jason Sousa. Jason is a highly respected mindset and mental performance coach who's transforming how athletes train their minds. He's the founder of the Mental Edge Athletics and the creator of the Mind vs. Mission coaching method, a framework that helps athletes separate from the negative inner voice that holds them back and step fully into their mission, competing with confidence, focus, and freedom. What I love about Jason's approach is how he blends sports psychology to give athletes and parents practical tools to handle pressure, overcome fear, and stay mentally strong throughout every challenge. Through his coaching, online programs, and his social media platform, Jason is changing how parents, coaches, and athletes think about mental training, making it simple, accessible, and incredibly powerful. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation and take away tools that will help you and your junior golfer to live with more confidence. Let's dive in. Jason, I am so happy to have you on. I am a fan of you. I've been following you for some time on your Instagram and have used a lot of your mindset tools and just quotes that you've posted with my son and our journey and struggles in the golf world and raising a junior golfer. I would love to first start out, before we jump into some of the questions I have for you, to talk about your background. You have a very unique background, having played professional sports and are a dad to 4 kids. So you also have a dad perspective of kids who are in sports. So I would love to just hear a little bit more about your background, what got you into mental coaching, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me and thanks for supporting my work. I do greatly appreciate that. And it's always good to connect with those who have been engaging with my content online. So thank you. And we'll have a lot of fun today. And in terms of my background, I was very fortunate, like many young athletes, we all just, have that big dream, right? In terms of getting to the top of your sport. And so I was fortunate, my pathway took me to collegiate sports and I had some success there and was fortunate to get drafted to the professional level of my sport, which was soccer. And, it was everything that I wanted. And unfortunately, it was very short lived. And the reason why it was simply not mentally prepared for what was, to come in terms of expectations and pressure. And, for me, that lack of mental training was the thing that held me back from really reaching my full potential. And so that pain of leaving so much on the plate, or on the table, I should say, is, the thing that became my fuel, my drive as to understand why, what held me back and what did I not understand. And, since then it's been my obsession to understand how this mental game works so that I can help athletes. And for me, it's about being the type of coach that I needed at that time. And that's really what it's about.
Wow. That's pretty profound. And thank you for being so open and vulnerable, sharing that. I know it must have been a journey, but I love that you have turned something that might have been a negative into very much a positive and are now helping so many others.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting as a young athlete, my soccer, becoming great at soccer was my obsession. And now I have this new obsession, this new type of drive, that same childlike drive that I had as an athlete, but now in this particular field, which is to be, a great mindset coach. And so it's interesting, how sometimes the things that we think don't work out for us are exactly what we needed, right? And so, sometimes
Absolutely.
we just need perspective.
Looking back on your journey, and you mentioned you are trying to be the coach that you wish that you had, what would be one thing that stood out to you of something that you're like, this would have tremendously helped me, whether it was encouragement, words of affirmation that someone would have shared, or just a style of coaching? What do you think would have helped you at your young age?
Yeah, I think the most important thing I would say is I wish I understood that my mind was not designed for me to be great in sports. And, understanding that how our minds are wired just on default is the obstacle for our greatness. And I didn't understand that, and no one had dove into that. And it's not until I really went to research and dive in and get educated and certified in different areas, and I realized, wow, this was the obstacle that I didn't know I had to overcome. And so for me, I wish I knew that. And for me, that's why I'm so passionate. That's why I love helping athletes understand that this is how your mind works. This is the obstacle you need to overcome, and this is how you overcome it.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Diving into one of our questions, particularly related to the struggles in junior golf with mindset, fear of failure. And I myself see my own son struggle with putting so much pressure on himself that his coach isn't even putting on him. I'm not putting on him. He's mostly doing it just for himself, which because he wants to be good. But I find myself struggling with the right words to say, especially in those tough moments of how I can help him. So, what kind of advice would you give parents who child puts a lot of pressure on themselves? Because we also don't want to diminish the drive that they have, but yet we don't know what to say sometimes to help fuel it either.
Yeah, no, great question. I know when it comes to golf, just to golf, but many of these individual sports, you often see that fear of failure or that desire to be perfect, right? Or that perfectionist trait. And typically from my experience is, those are often a deeper limiting belief, which is often, I fear failure, or I can't have failure. I need to be perfect because I need to validate to myself that I am good enough, right? And typically it's a limiting belief that is often hidden, which is I'm not good enough. And so when you have that limited belief of I'm not good enough, you looking for something external to validate, your identity. I am good enough, right? And that's being perfect or avoiding failure, which is an impossible trait to begin with, right? And so you can understand how that adds pressure to a young athlete when your identity is on the line, because I need this to feel good enough. And that is always going to add an unnecessary level of pressure and expectation on a young athlete, right? And for the most important thing is when I'm working with athletes is you're not using this sport to validate that you're good enough. Who you are at the court is good enough. I need you to understand that, right? And what you're using is golf for growth, right? It's not for validation, it's for growth in terms of who you become. And so that takes away that pressure of trying to use golf to get to that starting point of I'm good enough. No, I'm good enough is who you are at the core, right? And so everything beyond that is growth. And so understanding where these limiting beliefs are, I think, is important. Otherwise, it always becomes a hindrance to be able to perform.
Do you think that too many kids or even parents, whether it's golf and other sports, put too much of their identity into their sport and saying, I am a golfer, I am a basketball player, gymnast, whatever it is, and that becomes their identity? Do you think that that is kind of a slippery slope to go down?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, imagine if your whole identity is I'm a golfer, every time you're on the golf course, your identity is on the line. That's a lot of pressure, right? And so, golf is something that you do. It's not all of who you are. It can be a big part of who you are, but it's not all of what you do, right? Especially for young athlete, you might also be a student and a brother and a friend. And I'm also into basketball and I like collecting Pokemon cards or whatever it is, right? There's a whole bunch of different things that are about you. And so I often ask athletes when we talk about reducing that pressure, let's say I took this game away from you. Who are you? Okay. What kind of things would interest you? What kind of things would you look at? Right. And just to help them understand that, hey, there is a life outside of here. And it's not to say that I don't want you to have that drive. Certainly I want you to have that drive, but I don't want your identity to be on the line every time you go out to perform.
Sure. It reminds me a lot of the recent interview Scotty Scheffler did, where, he's like, if this was all taken away tomorrow, like fundamentally especially being a dad now, he's like, that is my most important role. And he, was very bold and just saying, golf's not necessarily his identity, yet he's winning everything. But I thought that was a really unique and interesting perspective and powerful.
Yeah, and I think Scotty, who I'm a big fan of, I think he is almost setting the example in terms of modern day mental performance, right? Where it's not like this, you got to go all in and it's win or lose. It's he looking at it from a different perspective completely, right? This is something that I do. This is something that I enjoy. This is not all of who I am, and your expectations that you have of me have nothing to do with the expectations I have on myself. Those are two completely different things. And so I think he's setting a great example, not just for young golfers. I think for young athletes, I think Scotty is really setting the tone for what it should look like in terms of mental.
Absolutely, for sure. When a young athlete or junior golfer, starts overthinking and gets in their own head on the course, what's a practical technique that you use to help them reset and refocus, or something a parent parent caddy could say to their junior golfer in that moment.
Yeah, when we're overthinking, typically that is when the mind has taken over our performance, right? And it's trying to control something that we often can't change or we have no control over, or there's a level of uncertainty. And so if you understand how the mind works, the mind is always looking for certainty. And the moment you start to focus on things that are uncertain, you've given an opportunity for your mind to take over your performance. And so one of the things that I often go to with my athletes, I call them go to your BFFs, right? Which are not your best friends forever, but they are your BFFs are, B standing for your body language. How are you going to carry yourself in this moment? F is your focus. Where is your focus right now? And the other F is your feelings. What are the feelings you want to be able to express in this moment? And then your S is your self-talk. Right. And so how are you talking to yourself in this moment? And so always lean on your BFFs, especially as a golfer, because you don't have teammates, but you can lean on your BFFs and what those look like. And typically with my athletes, I will identify what they look like at their best. What does their body language look like at their best? What does their self-talk sound like at their best? What are the feelings they express when they're at their very best? And where's your focus at the best? And so once we identify those, we can always go back to our BFFs when we get into a bit of a spiral and lean on those to help us.
I love that. I'm definitely going to use that with my son in his next tournament. And I find myself, even as an adult, finding takeaways to learn from, right? Because part of the challenge too that we go through as parents is a lot of self-discovery, even of ourselves and what we're lacking, or maybe where we're making mistakes or where we need to grow as individuals too. What advice would you give to parents, or do you yourself do with your own children in their sports, to kind of check yourself and say, this is their journey and I'm here to support them, not overtake it? Because I see it, I've done it myself, I've seen it in other parents, and it's hard to not want to control so much, right? Because we want to make it better for them. We want to make it easier or more fun or enjoyable. And sometimes it's hard as a parent, I know for me, to like take a step back and allow him to experience the emotions, the journey himself. So what advice would you have as a coach and also as a parent yourself?
Yeah, it's always a fine line, right? And it's interesting because now I can see it from all the different angles. Being a parent myself and haven't been that athlete, and now working with different athletes and parents, and I think, a lot of that tension comes from the place. And I understand it as a parent when we look at our kids. We see the full potential in our kids before they ever see it in themselves, and we want so badly for them to maximize on that potential, right? It's like we don't want you to fall short on that, and that creates a lot of tension because now all of a sudden we don't want them to slip up, and we want them to have this level of discipline and dedication, and we get upset with them when they don't perform to their abilities because we see it for them. And that creates a lot of tension with the young athlete and the parent, right? And I think for the parent, I would want them to understand that oftentimes performance is not completely within our control, right? And sometimes things are not going to go within our way in terms of what we want in terms of performance. And so to be able to push them all the time in terms of performance is difficult on an athlete, because imagine, when we ask an athlete, like, why, what happened out there? Like, why didn't you perform well? You should have been better. Oftentimes for a young athlete, that just sounds like, you're not good enough, right? And that's how it's perceived by a young athlete. And that becomes their internal voice. And so for me, it's really important that we push them in areas that they can control, right? And for me, I'm very big on character, right? You're someone who doesn't give up, and you're someone who's dedicated. And you're someone who's, speaks to themselves with empowerment and all the things that are within your control. I want you to win those battles. And I understand you're going to lose some of the external battles, and I can forgive you for that. But I really want you to push you in terms of your character building, because the reality is we want all of our kids to move on to the next phase of sports. Not all of them will, but they all have to move on to the next phase of life. And we can utilize sports as the vehicle to teach them so many of these things that are going to set them up for success.
Absolutely. Wow, that's great. Just you have such good insight. I feel like I'm already just learning so much, and I'm excited to share this with other parents because I feel like they're going to have a lot of takeaways from this chat that we're having. Do you think, and just with people you've worked with or have seen, do you think that a lot of the child's mental hiccups or roadblocks are because of the parenting? I mean, we're not trying to shame parents, but I'm more of trying to be more eye-opening of like, is the parenting possibly causing some of the roadblocks mentally in children?
Yeah, no, for sure. And completely unintentional, right? And I've never worked with a parent. I've worked with a lot of athletes, a lot of parents. I've never met a parent that didn't want the absolute best for their kid. I don't think that exists. It's just they don't understand, sometimes the words that they say or the behavior that they model, how that's impacting their kids, right? And so it doesn't come from a place of bad intentions. It comes from a place of perhaps just a misunderstanding. But
Yes.
for sure, I would say we are the number one. We are going to have the greatest influence in terms of what that mindset is going to look like for our kids, right? Based on how we speak to them, how we model ourselves, and so to be mindful of that, I think is the first step, and that's why for me, when it comes to mental performance or mental skills, for me, awareness is the greatest skill that you can have because from the place of awareness, now you have choice, and with choice you have power, right? But it all comes from a place of awareness.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like when you are coaching a lot of your students, you're working hand in hand with the parent as well, because it's kind of like a whole family coaching session in a way. Would you say that would be true?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a team effort, right? And it takes a village to raise a kid, and I'm just part of that village in a sense. And for me, it's yes, of course, I want to help athletes understand how the mental game is played, how you win that, but also I'm an extension of the family and the morals and the values that they've taught those kids, right? And for me, there needs to be a good fit there in terms of the family that I'm working with because it is a team effort, and the parents oftentimes the parents will say, I'm probably, the biggest hindrance to my child's mindset. And I need you to coach them, but I also need you to be honest with me and help, coach me through that process as well. Because they genuinely always want the best for their kids, right? Even if they don't know how to go about it. And I think, that's the most important thing. And even when I'm dealing with an athlete and we're having a conversation in terms of some of the conflict that they're having with the parent, I'm very honest and transparent and say, hey, your mom and dad, they're coming from a place of care and love and a desire for you to be the best version of yourself. And as a parent, I understand that. And, I don't want you to misinterpret that and try to kind of bridge that gap between what the parents are trying to portray and how the athlete is portraying that, right? And try to bridge that gap between the two.
Sure, that's great. What would you say with the athletes that you work with, from the younger side to the ones that are, right on the college track, on the cusp of going to college or even pro? What would you say are the two biggest differences in the young athletes and those that are more teenagers with the more well-developed brain? Is there a difference, or are their mindsets pretty similar when they come to you?
Certainly a level of maturity, but also if they're a little bit older, if I get an athlete that's a little bit older, they're more attached to that older version of themselves, right? And so it's a little bit more work in terms of really helping them rewire their mindset because they oftentimes oftentimes they'll get a parent reach out to me and say, hey, can you have a conversation with my son or daughter and kind of get them to change their mindset a little bit? And I'll ask, how old is your son or daughter? And they're 18, and you're asking me to change the way that your 18-year-old thinks in a 30-minute conversation. It's, I'm very good at what I do, but I'm not a miracle worker, right? And so the longer they've been kind of in this place where they've been thinking a certain way and feeling a certain way and speaking to themselves a certain way, then it's more work in terms of helping them rewire that, right? And so just a level of work that's required, I say, is the biggest difference, but I at the same time I work with athletes who come with the willingness to see that change, right? And so
I
they're
see.
willing to get uncomfortable. And for me, that's really important.
Or, well, I guess if they are struggling even in the sport and seeing, the ramifications of it, they're probably at their breaking point of like something's got to give, right? So they come to you as the expert to help them navigate that.
Yeah, and for me, as parents, from one parent to the next, so yourself being a parent as well, the passion that an athlete has for their sport is the vehicle that I can utilize to really teach them a lot of these things, right? Because they so desperately want to get better in the sport now. But the bigger picture is, the same stuff that I'm teaching them in terms of sports performance is going to help them in all areas of their life. And for me, that's always the bigger picture, But if I tell little Timmy, hey, I'm going to show you how the mind works and how you can overcome that so that you can be great in business when you're 25. That doesn't mean anything to little Timmy, right? But if I
Hmm.
say, little Timmy, I'm going to show you how to win the mental game so you can start having more consistent performances on the golf course now, that means the world, right? And so without them realizing it, it's helping them in all areas.
What would you say to parents or even juniors themselves who get stuck in this comparison game? I mean, I see it in the junior golf world, just when we're in tournaments and stuff, and my son is competing against some of the top kids who are in the state. And they've also been playing longer, so their skill levels just beyond surpassed my son, but yet he compares himself to them, even though they're completely on different journeys. How do we as parents and then even the juniors kind of combat the comparison game?
Yeah, the comparison game, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And
Hmm.
if you understand how the mind works, you'll understand why it wants to make comparisons to validate where we are. I heard an analogy once, and I think it's a brilliant one in terms of athletic development. We need to think of athletic development as like a bag of popcorn. And sometimes those kernels pop earlier, and sometimes they pop a little bit later. And sometimes the ones that pop early and the ones we think are going to be the best ones are the ones that burn out first. And the ones that burn our pop last are the ones that have the most butter on them. And you just never know who's going to be the most, buttery, popcorn kernel coming from that bag. And it's about being in that process and remaining in that process or the bag for as long as you can. And I'm an example of that. Myself, I was playing on, what would have been the second team of my club till I was about 14. And then at 15, I made the jump to the first team. And I wasn't one of the more naturally gifted players. And by the time I was 14, I was starting to catch up. And then 15, and all of a sudden, 17, I'm bypassing these guys who were, quote unquote, more naturally gifted than me, just because I stuck to the process and I did the work, and I built the character, the intangibles that take athletes beyond talent. And so I'm a great example of that. And so for athletes, I would say never underestimate what you can do in a 2 to 3 year period, right? And so don't just be in the now, and look at the bigger picture of where you can be. Have a goal of what that looks like for you, and get excited about what your potential looks like, and continue to compare yourself to that version of you.
I love that. And I love your analogy of the bag of popcorn. And I'm going to use that for my son, because he's definitely a late bloomer in a lot of areas. And I think that gets into his mind. But I think that analogy will be very helpful.
Yeah, hopefully it helps, and who knows, you could be the one with the most butter on it. So you just got to stay in
Right?
that bag.
That is such a great analogy. Going back to parenting, what are some things that you tell your kids, on a daily basis to have a positive mindset, whether it's with their sports, school, or just with their internal, any conflict that they're having, at school with friends or whatnot? What's kind of a routine that you have, that you wake up in the morning, have your breakfast, that you say to them before they go out the door for the day?
First of all, at home, there's certain things that I don't allow to be said. Because I understand the power of language, and if you understand how powerful language is, you'll be very mindful of how you speak and how you allow your kids to speak. And so we have, with especially with my older ones, and now the younger one wants to get into it, but there's certain things I don't allow to be said, right? Things like I can't, I'm not good at that. It's not my fault, right? Certain things that shape limiting beliefs or victimhood in terms of over mentality. And so, before they can have, whether it's, a movie night on the weekend, or their video game time, which we limit a lot, but they owe me 5 burpees every time they say something that's not allowed. But it's fun for them, right? And so, we catch it and say, hey, you owe me 5 burpees before you can have your screen time. And so I'm very mindful of language. But the other thing is, for me, there is, and this is how I coach my athletes, and this is really, the foundation of my coaching program, is there is an internal battle. And we often say it's you versus you. And it's true, but it's very confusing, that terminology, for a young athlete, like you versus you. Which you are you? Is it the first one or the second one? And if you're the second one, who's the first one? Right. And so
Mm,
for me, I really broke it down, and it's really, it's your mind, the way your mind is wired, which is not wired for you to be great in sports, versus your mission. Who is it that you say you want to be? Right. And so that is the internal battle. Your mind is always pulling you away from your mission. And so every morning, at the end of the day, I reflect back on with my kids and say, who won yesterday? Okay. Was it your mind or your mission? Right. And we look at it from different angles. We talk about, okay, this is how your mind is preventing you from developing confidence based on the way it's wired. This is your mission, and this is how you develop confidence. And so we look at it all the different ways in terms of mental performance. And now I made it a game for them. So now it's fun, because now I gave them an internal competition, and say, here's your mind. And we'll even give your mind a character, a name, right? And here's that person. And look, they're trying to prevent you from your greatness, right? And are you going to allow that? And now every day it's this battle, okay, versus your mind versus your mission. And so we ask, at the end of the day, who won, right? And if it's your mind, it's an opportunity for us to reflect and see where we can get better. And if it's your mission, great, that's the win. And so every day, for example, yesterday morning, my 9-year-old woke up and we saw him. He's like, today my mission dominates, right? And so we have this internal, now it's this real thing that they're excited about, because athletes are competitive. And so I
mhm.
made it a competition for them, win to mental game. And so they've gone from not just embracing it, but loving it every day, right? And so who you become in pursuit of the goal is the victory. And in the goal, the outcome, which is outside of our control, is just the bonus.
I love that. And I mean, I'm even thinking of how I can relate that to me as being a caddy for my son. I'm learning right along with him. But I knew when he wanted to go down this path, I said, I'm going to be the best caddy I know how to be for him. And so it's a journey that I'm trying to rise to the occasion, right? So for me, if I can support him, whether he goes the distance or not, like I feel like that will be success. The opportunity to bond too is also what I'm looking for. But I can see where parents can also apply that to themselves, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And sometimes we're so focused on what it is that our kids we want our kids to achieve that we forget, who they are in the moment, right? And so,
Mhm.
I was having a conversation with a father, and his son was playing, a big football game, rivals in Florida. It was a big thing. And he's like, I'm worried about him, I just don't want him to make any mistakes. And I said to him, in 50 years from now, you're going to look back like, oh my God, those were the best days of my life. And I wish I just enjoyed that moment, right? Instead of sitting there, sometimes you see parents and they're overly stressed and they're worried about, oh my God, I hope my kid performs. And I'm terrified if they don't do well. And you would give anything to be back in that moment in 50 years and enjoy it. But you're here now, right? You're here now. And so don't take it for granted. These times go by quickly and enjoy the moment while it's here.
Absolutely. That's a great reminder that I think we all need, right? Especially in the stressful times. Speaking of stressful times, like on the course, and I know from my own experience, I've had to pull my son from a tournament, mid-tournament, due to a really poor attitude. And I remember it being such a struggle, even for myself, of wondering if I'm making the right decision. Ultimately, it was a good decision. And his coach is like, hopefully this is the first and last time you ever have to do this. And it kind of taught him a lesson. And there was some shame around having to see his friends who were like, "What's up? What's wrong? Why are you upset?" And he had to say, "I have a bad attitude. That's why I'm leaving." But when those moments happen in golf or any sport, as a parent, what is, advice that you would give of what to do that is going to help? Like, A, correct the attitude and the behavior, and B, help them learn that, like, this is not okay and to move forward, hopefully, with that in the past. So, what advice would you give to the parent on how to handle a situation like that? Because I've also been on the course where I've seen parents yell at their kids and just, it's a bad situation for everybody. And I know that's not the right call, and in my case, pulling my son out of the tournament was the right call, but that might not be the right call for every parent. So it's hard to find that balance of what does it look like to discipline your kid, when they're trying to thrive at something that they love.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I'm certainly not a parenting expert, and I can only share my perspective from a mental performance coach. I think one thing we need to be mindful of is, especially now, because we put these kids in environments that look like professional sports, right, at a very young age, but they don't have the emotional maturity to be dealing with that level of pressure and expectation. And then we wonder why, why is this 8-year-old having a meltdown? It's because they're 8 years old and they still haven't learned how to process some of those emotions, right? And
And
so I think
emotional
for us as
regulation.
yeah, I think for us as parents is to one is to understand where they are in terms of psychological development, which is easier said than done. But more than that is what I love about sports is that it gives us endless opportunities as parents for learning opportunities, right? And I think that is a learning opportunity. And with my older son of just a few weeks ago, we were having a conversation. He came off a tournament where he really struggled, as an individual and as a team, and a lot of things didn't go well. And I said to him, I said, son, this weekend you took a lot of L's, right? I said, you took a lot of L's. I said, the difference between great athletes and others is, you can either make those L's your losses or your lessons, right? And that is your responsibility. Okay. And everything here, and so for me, when everything becomes a win or a lesson, then there's no losses. You're get into the state of endless growth. And that's where I try to get my athletes. You're in the state of endless growth because everything is a winner, everything's a lesson. Either way, you're growing from that situation. And so for me, once you turn all your L's into lessons, that's the place that you want to be. And as parents, we need to turn those L's into lessons as well, especially when they're younger. It's our responsibility to make that the lesson.
Absolutely. I can definitely resonate with that, as I'm just seeing it with my own child. And when I do turn it into a lesson, I can see that he really takes it to heart, So just finding those opportunities to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, your son, for example, how old is your son?
He's 8,
He's 8. Yeah. And so,
going on 6 sometimes. Right?
and you can see, and it's different, right? And so, my 11-year-old, for example, you know, he's almost an old soul, and I swear he's been on Earth a couple times before, and he's a
Yeah.
completely different character than my 9-year-old, who is, this big personality, lots of fun, outgoing, but very sensitive and reacts to situations differently. And it's about understanding our kids and understanding where they are, and trying to be mindful of that, because it's so easy for us to just get emotional about their emotional outbursts, and then we've just done the same thing that they did. And so it's about being the
Absolutely.
example more than anything else.
I think the thing I've had a hard time learning as a mom, which I'm learning and I'm getting better, but is, like you said, not allowing his emotions to become mine. And because it's like he's sad, I'm sad. If he's upset, I'm upset. And it's learning to allow him to have those feelings, and myself remain calm and be supportive of him and not fall into the trap of having the exact same emotion he's having. And I still struggle with it, but it's something that I'm very conscious of now when we're on the golf course, just because I have made those mistakes. And, if he sees me upset, frustrated for him, then he's going to equally continue. He's not going to recover from the frustration, right?
Yeah, for sure. And we're always in this, even as adults, we're always trying to get in this place where we feel better, and we often forget, to get better at feeling, right? And understanding our emotions, and helping kids understand their emotions as well. And what does that mean? And dive into that, right? What deeper, what is this triggering deeper for you? And that is the opportunity, right? Because oftentimes the things that trigger us is the opening to what is sitting underneath the surface that we need to heal, right? And so, I think we try to feel better often. I think oftentimes we need to do a better job of feeling as well.
How do you tell athletes to tap into their inner emotions and identify them? Do you ask them, hey, how are you feeling? Are you feeling sad? Tell me more about it. Or how do you get them to verbalize what emotion they're feeling? Because they may say one thing, but then deep down, you're like, I know there's something deeper. Like, how do you get them to go deep, especially at a young age, to be able to share? Because sometimes I think getting it out in the open of what they're feeling is kind of, you get to the root cause of what's going on, why they're really upset.
Yeah, I think it's important for me as their coach is to, number one, build that trust where they allow themselves to be vulnerable, and they understand, here's someone who generally wants the best for me, and here's someone that you know who I know who can help me, and I can trust. And for me, I think that's why I've had a lot of success in this space, is because I've been able to build that relationship with athletes, which for me is the most important thing. And then from there, help them understand why we dive into those things. I think one of my challenges with mental performance now, and I believe my process is a lot different, is with mental performance, we do a lot of surface level fixes where we don't do that deeper work that allows for that transformation that has a lasting impact, right? And I'll give you an example. Like if someone has that they have that trigger, we just give them some breath work to try to fix the situation. There's a lot of value to that, but again, we're putting a band-aid on the bigger surface issue, which is, why did you get into that place to begin with, right? And
Mm,
so, and I'll use the example of mistakes. So I see all these things, here's a reset after you make a mistake to kind of come back to things. And that's great, but that needs to have context. Why are you in such a fear of making mistakes to begin with? And that is the deeper work that needs to be done. Okay. And
mm,
so oftentimes when we look at results, I know I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, but when we look at, the results of an athlete, we often go,
mhm,
okay, let's fix the mechanics of them. Okay. And so we do the
mhm,
behavior part of it. But the behavior is a reflection of the thoughts and the feelings that the athlete has. Okay. So now most athletes, they get results. It's not going away. They try to fix the behavior. And then they may apply some mental performance tools, which tries to manage the thoughts and the feelings of the athlete, which allows for different behavior. But from a deeper level, the things that generate the thoughts and the feelings is the beliefs of who we are, right? Our
mhm.
identity. And that's the work that I dive into, because I want to dive into the belief system of who you are, the identity of who you are, because that's going to change the way that you think and feel, which is going to change your behavior, which is ultimately going to lead to different results. And for me, that's the deeper work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Wow. This is fantastic. With the identity too of discovering themselves, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, not allowing them to just define themselves by the sport. Do you think it's a mistake for kids to go in on one sport only, or should they have other sports and or extracurricular activities? Or is it better to go all in on one and focus, but then have, fun outside of it? But what do you think is kind of the best, or is it different for each
Yeah, I think it is different for each person, right? We can look at it's easy to look at someone like Tiger Woods and say, okay, it's about going all in at 4 and being a sergeant as a parent, and that worked for Tiger. And sometimes we think, okay, well that's the process, right? And so I often see I see now on Instagram there's a couple of videos out where it's elite athletes have elite parents, and it's this concept where you got to be like on top of your kids and pushing them as hard and as possible because they've seen it work for a couple athletes and they think that is the process. And I think parents need to be very mindful that if that is your process and let's say your kid doesn't make it, now you have a kid that didn't meet your expectation, who you took away their childhood, right? And to what extent are you willing to sacrifice that because you need your kid to make it, right? And so elite athletes don't have necessarily elite parents, they have elite parenting, right? And that for me is different, right? In terms of how you carry yourself, how you push in terms of character. But in terms of them, I think they should have multiple sports when they're younger. Number one, it allows for them to be able to learn different skills, different mechanics, which has been proven to develop better athletes, number one. And it takes away that pressure on identity in terms of who they are at a young age on one particular sport, right? And so for multiple reasons, and then once they get to a place where they can kind of discover where their passion is, for me, one of the most important things is these kids have to have an inner passion for their sport. Otherwise, they are not going to last the distance. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Do you see, maybe not necessarily clients, but just being in this industry for a while, have you seen that a lot of kids are kind of being pushed by the parents? Maybe they are naturally talented, but then they kind of tap out because you're right, the drive's not there. They're 12, they're about to hit puberty, and they don't want to go practice because to them it becomes a job. It's not fun anymore. Do you see a lot of that happening in golf and just even across the board in other sports?
Yes, and the statistics now are about 70% of youth sports participants will stop playing the sport at about 13, 14, right? And that's an alarming number of kids that stop playing sports. And it's a number of reasons. They're burnt out already. They stopped having fun. The pressure is too much. We've created this environment, and that's my big thing is that, we've created this environment for athletes where we're trying to train them professionally at such a young age and put all this pressure and expectation on them. And then when it comes to the mental game, we're just like, hey, we hope you figure that part out. Right. And so you can understand why so many athletes are struggling mentally because of the weight that we put on them without any real education, tools, resources for them to navigate through the mental challenges that come with that. And so that for me is one of my big things or one of my big missions that we need to change athletic development. Mental performance needs to be, when we talk about developing an athlete, a golfer, for example, they need to understand the technical side of things and have their strategy and be fit, obviously. But then the mental side is also a component of athletic development. And this needs to start being part of the foundation of athletic development for us to prevent these athletes from burning out and quitting at the age of 13 and 14.
Sure. What do you think would be something that coaches could help their students with? Let's say, someone couldn't afford to hire you, and they're just using, the coach that's at the school. Is this something that this is kind of going off topic probably from what would be on the podcast, but like I could see you, maybe you already do, like schools hiring you. They need to hire you for an assembly to come in and like teach these coaches all these mindset tools because a lot of these kids don't have access to it at all. So, what do you see kind of being a solution? I guess that's my question. What do you see being as a solution for the kids who don't have access to a mental coach or these mindset tools? Is it through their coach? Is it through the school? Like, where could they find, resources if they weren't able to come to you and hire you?
Yeah, no, and that's part of my long-term vision is to be able to have resources where, whether it's coaches, individuals, sports organizations where they can access this and even become certified, right? In terms of the way that potentially how I coach athletes, right? And I think, I have a different angle in terms of how I coach athletes in this particular area and it's been proven to work. And so, for me, it's about how many athletes can we help? And I can't do that on my own, right? So how many other resources can I make available, whether it's through sports organizations and individual coaches and the more that people understand this, the more that we're in a position to help young athletes. Because at the end of the day, I mean, listen, we all want our kids, to have success in sports for sure. But more than anything, we want our kids to be in a situation where internally they're at peace with themselves and they have love for themselves and they believe in themselves. that for me is the biggest mission that I'm on. And fortunately, sports is an avenue that gives me the access to be able to do that with these young athletes, right? And so for me to be able to do on a scale is the big long-term vision for sure.
I love that. And I see you going very far with this too, because it's definitely needed. As we kind of come to a close, what would be just a piece of advice you could leave golf parents with as they navigate this journey? What would be kind of the top three piece of advice that you would give golf parents?
Number one, your first responsibility as a sports parent, a golf parent, is to give every opportunity for your child to love the game, because that inner passion is going to be the thing that sustains them in terms of long-term growth. Number one. Secondly, if you want your kids to develop a certain mindset, model it first and foremost, because they're going to do a very good job of modeling you as opposed to listening to your advice. And then thirdly, never allow who your child is as an athlete today trump who your child is as a person tomorrow. And what I mean by that is, they may be struggling athletically, but never overlook, their character more than their performance, because the character is what allows them to be successful in all areas of their life. And ultimately, that is what we want for our kids.
Absolutely. That's great. I enjoyed our conversation so much. So, is there anything else that you think would add value to the podcast that you'd want to touch on?
Yeah, I would say the last thing I would leave for parents and for athletes is that if you're really struggling with the mental game, know that it's not a sign that you're mentally broken, because I think that's where we kind of go. It's like, I'm mentally weak because I'm struggling here. It is not because you're mentally weak or you're mentally broken at all. It's simply because you don't understand how the mind works, and so you're having trouble navigating through that. Okay? And so I often tell that with the athletes, you're not mentally weak at all. Your mind is doing exactly what it's designed to do. You just don't understand how it was designed. And so for me, the most important thing is for them to know they're not mentally broken, and they simply don't know how to win that game, but there are resources to help them.
Absolutely. Thank you. For our audience, how can they find you if they want to hire you? What is the best way to go about that? So, can you share a little bit more about how someone could go about finding you online and hiring you for their child if they'd like to?
Yeah, it seems most people find me on Instagram. Jason A Sousa is my handle, or Coach J might be the way to find me on Instagram. And then I do have a website, which is getyourmentaledge.com, which has a little bit more resources there. And if they want to be able to book a free consultation and see what that looks like in terms of my coaching program, but those would be the two main avenues to find me.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being here. We've enjoyed having you. And for everyone listening or watching on YouTube, we will have ways to contact Jason in our show notes. So please be sure to tune in to the next podcast, and we'll see you soon.